that was a hard decade, and just being able to look back and understand why, that was life-changing.
The allowances that are or are not made for flexibility can have a huge impact on you when you are ADHD.
Autonomy and or literally being the boss is the best way to manage your ADHD at work, unfortunately.
There's a concept that you should be able to write your thesis 1 hour every day.
That does not happen.
Today, I get to chat to the wonderful Leslie Poston. Leslie is a marketing executive and a media psychologist, currently completing her PhD at Fielding Graduate University. She's also the founder of Mind Media Tech, a consultancy that melds research with organizational psychology and strategy. And as a woman executive navigating the professional landscape with ADHD, she brings a really unique perspective on adapting and thriving in a high-stakes environment, which I'm very, very excited to talk to you about. So welcome, Leslie.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So you're both a marketing executive and a media psychologist. What does that mean? Do you want to take us through that?
Most of my day job is spent as chief marketing officer for an AI-based data science company. So that is what I do all day. We just got acquired, so that's going to be changing. I'm going to be in charge of external comms at the new acquiring company. So as you know, the ADHD brain loves a new challenge. So I should be in my element for the next little bit. And then for media psychology, what that is the study of everything from misinformation, disinformation, what makes things go viral, why cults are formed and cult-like behaviors. So it's a very interesting field of study and very relevant to what I do every day in marketing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have a million. What makes things go viral?
Emotion makes things go viral. You see people push the anger emotion a lot online, unfortunately, rage baiting, rage clicking, but you can also go viral with sadness and hope and joy as well. It's just a little harder to do. So.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. So what does a day in your life look like?
Now that I know I'm ADHD, a day in my life involves me giving the first 2 hours of my day to myself. I protect my morning time from waking to signing in from work. I make sure I spend time with the dog, maybe go on a little walk outside, get some outside fresh air, and then I settle in for work. I try very hard to have all of my meetings early in the day. We work across time zones, so that's not always possible. But I find that my personal preference would be end of day meetings, but that doesn't work for anyone else in the company. No one else has this brain. So chunk up in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I can multitask and finish all of my projects.
I love that. And so what are you doing? Do you take many breaks during the day? You obviously said you're spending the morning with the dogs, going for a little walk. Is there any other kind of breaks during your day?
Not structured breaks. It's interesting that depending on where you work, right, you get different opportunities to self-accommodate. So I would say with the data science company, there was a lot of opportunities for breaks and self-accommodation because many of the people at the company are also ADHD or autistic or have other challenges that are common to the data science space, right? And the new acquiring company is much more neurotypical, much more structured toward a single time zone. So what I'm finding is I'm utilizing my standing desk more often than I did at the other company. I have a desk treadmill now, so it helps if I can turn off the camera and walk during meetings. And I do make myself take a midday break and just get outside, just stop looking at a screen to kind of reset my brain.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The differences, they can be very subtle and they can be very large. I've worked in a variety of different environments, and it is interesting. The allowances that are or are not made for flexibility can have a huge impact on you when you are ADHD.
Definitely. Well, I also didn't know I was ADHD for most of my life. I found out during the pandemic. I actually found out thanks to TikTok, which sparked a whole section of my research. And I also found out, speaking of tough conversations, I found out my mother knew and didn't tell me. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and we all got tested at the same time. And for some reason, she decided because I was gifted, in air quotes, that I did not need to know.
Gifted, masking.
So I didn't know. And so the girls got accommodations, but I did not. And so it's been an absolute game changer.
How did you feel about that?
I feel like I should be more mad, but I'm old enough now that I'm like, well, I succeeded anyway, so we're just going to move past it, you know?
Yeah, no, that's probably a very good way of thinking about it. So you found out during the pandemic, which I think a lot of people can relate to. A lot of people found out during the pandemic, and a lot of people found out through TikTok. TikTok was like, out here explaining how everybody's brain works and, finding the right videos for us, being like, you're scrolling just a bit faster than everybody else. So what was that journey for you then? Once you found out you had ADHD, what happened?
So there was an interesting kind of grieving process. Right?
Yeah.
Just kind of acknowledging like harder parts of my life, especially my 20s. I think doing a little research since I found out the hormone changes in your 20s would have been contributing to that. And apparently I have more to look forward to when I hit perimenopause later in life. So that was a hard decade. And just being able to look back and understand why, that was life-changing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's so interesting. Yeah, I feel like that's something that a lot of people can relate to, that concept of having a grieving period. I definitely feel like I had it as well. Especially, how long did it take you to actually get the diagnosis?
It was pretty fast to get the diagnosis. Once I started seeking help, I started answering the questions with my psychologist. She sent me to a psychiatrist. They were like, no, yeah, you're definitely ADHD.
You got it. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And so once you moved through that grieving process, was there sort of a second phase? Because I feel like a lot of people, and this might not be the case for you, but I think a lot of people talk about this idea of like, you get diagnosed, you kind of go through this first phase, and then you go through like a second, like skills phase almost. Like sometimes it takes us a while to just get to grips with what we're doing.
So that didn't really hit me, but I think that's more a function of how busy I keep myself than anything, which is very intentional on my part. I would say that always having a big goal and a big job, two separate things, are one of the ways that I've functioned. So having the PhD activity going on while I was finding this out and a big job going through an acquisition, I didn't really have time to have like a skills regression or anything like that.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting because I feel like that idea of a big goal, what we do is we help people with ADHD achieve big goals. And I feel like that is helpful having that direction. But there's also the burnout question. Is this something that you've experienced?
I have in the past. So, and I did not know what it was then, but now looking retroactively, I can tell. And I would say that was very much job related. It was in a job where the neurotypical pressures were quite high and the neurotypical management was very inflexible. And so I left that job, and it's been a while, but I would say looking back, it was probably a good 18 to 20 months before I felt like myself again. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. We definitely hear a lot of stories about that, especially when you are kind of, going for it. And it's good. It's great. But then you do have to be careful about burnout as well.
Yeah, definitely.
What changes in your life have you made to support your ADHD now, would you say? Like, what's different?
I would say knowing that I have it gives me permission to do something I was already doing naturally and do it with more intent. And that is to make sure that I'm always doing something interesting and that I always understand why I'm doing something. So finding out why I'm doing something can sometimes irritate people because they just want you to do it.
Yes.
Without question.
The reason is I need you to do it. That's the reason.
So I've become a little more open with disclosing to people. I wouldn't say I disclose to everybody, but I've been a little more open with, hey, I'm asking you why, because it's going to help me get your project done faster if I understand the purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Oh, that's really interesting. And so what does your week look like? Because when we met to sort of talk about this podcast, we discussed like the differences that people have in with ADHD in terms of accommodating themselves. Do you accommodate yourself in terms of your week and what that looks like as well?
I do. So when the job allows, I like to do a 4-day work week with 4 long days and then nothing on the 4th day or on the 5th day.
Mm-hmm.
That is not always possible. So when that's not possible, I try and give myself a meeting-free day.
Yeah.
So my calendar can mimic a 4-day week, even if I'm there doing work.
Are you familiar with the concept of maker time and manager time?
I am. I actually wrote something about that on Medium many moons ago. And it's one of those random articles that people keep finding
Coming back to, yeah.
People keep coming back to it. But I would say that's the hardest for any ADHD person, I think, at a job. It's getting those few chunks of time.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept because, I've been talking about it with my clients. And would you mind, given that you wrote the article, explaining a little bit of what it is?
Sure. So it was actually a term coined by someone from Y Combinator in 2009. And it basically is talking about how we need to shift gears when we're in manager mode and shift back to a different gear when we're in maker mode, actually being creative. And there's a huge tax on the brain when you shift between the gears repeatedly during the day. It makes you less effective, difficult for everyone, including ADHD people. So the way to accommodate that is to do things like time blocking, end meetings early, try and give yourself chunks of manager time and chunks of maker time to make it easier on your brain.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's an interesting conversation because we know with ADHD that we can take a bit longer to transition. And you might know this as an academic. There's a concept that you should be able to write your thesis 1 hour every day.
That does not happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's advice I received in university, and it's also advice that I've heard other people received in that space. But it's sort of antithetical to the concept of maker time and the idea of a 4-day work week. What you said is really interesting because I don't have a 4-day work week. I like what I do too much, but I do have the same thing. I have a meeting-free day to have that maker time. It is interesting that is as a different concept. I wonder if, for those people listening, whether that's something that they could try as well.
I would highly suggest it. And the other thing I love doing is time blocking during the weeks to just give myself chunks of time to get things done. And I think it's especially something about being in VP, SVP, C-suite roles. You're doing a lot of meeting time, a lot of meeting time. And there's often no breaks between the meetings. And we can argue all day long about whether that meeting should have been an email, but the reality is you have to be there. So I try to give myself little pockets where I can duck away and actually do my work and manage my team.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, Skye here, just popping in with a quick strategy for you. As some of you might know, we've recently launched the Goals Achieved with ADHD Academy, and some of our members kindly agreed to have their sessions recorded so that I could share them with you. So what you're about to hear is a snippet of a strategy that Amani and I worked on to help her with her goal of getting a job. So hopefully you'll find this strategy helpful, and if you'd like to talk with me about how you can achieve your goals with ADHD, just click the description below to book a free 15-minute focus session and we'll get started together.
How do we beat that procrastination, rejection sensitivity cycle around this incredibly complicated, incredibly rejection sensitive thing?
Applying for a job brings up so much in me. I'm giving myself these deadlines, which are my kryptonite. If I were anybody else, I would be like, it is not a big deal. What matters is that you get them out.
There's different parts of applications in general. Some of them are rejection sensitive, some of them aren't. We need to divide tasks into things that are stressful and things that are not stressful. Do the more relaxed bits, and then we're going to get a bunch of dopamine and chunk together all of the stressful bits and do those together. We want to separate the writing the application self and the sending the application self. How do you feel about the strategy? Are you happy with that as a thing to try?
Yes. Very, very excited about it. That sounds great.
Definitely. So do you find that blocking out a whole day just for meetings? I'm getting into the weeds here, but I think this is really important. Do you think that blocking a whole day for meetings is useful for you? In terms of, do you find yourself getting more exhausted, or does it give you energy if you don't have anything to do besides the meeting that day?
If it's a day of all meetings back to back, no breaks, all on camera, I'm exhausted. And for me, it is not the back-to-back or the meetings. It is the on-camera part that makes me exhausted because I am ADHD. I want to move. So like you'll even notice now I'm very consciously not doing this because we're talking and I don't want to be rude, right? But if I were not on camera, I would 100% be bopping along in my chair while we talk, taking notes, doodling, which people think is really rude in meetings, especially if you are an executive. So you have to compose and sit, and that's very exhausting.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I am using a fidget as we speak under the table.
Okay, I'm going to have to try that one. I haven't tried the fidget yet, but maybe that's the key.
You 100%. I have this one. It's called Fingears for those people who are listening, and it's I've used this for probably 2 years now. Yeah, it's just like a couple of magnets that connect and disconnect, and so you can kind of flip them around. And something like that can be really helpful, just because one of the things we often talk about is the concept of with ADHD, we have our dopamine is processed in a different way. And we talk about, there's so much talk about dopamine now and dopamine deprivation and dopamine stacking. It's kind of interesting. It's all coming from a neurotypical perspective. But one of the things we know with ADHD is we are functionally doing it slightly differently. And so when other people are at a 7, we're kind of at a 5 or a 4. And we need just a little bit of stimulation to just bring us back up. And sensory stimulation can be a part of that.
Yeah, I'm legitimately going to go look into getting a fidget now to save me during all-day meeting days.
You're welcome. Yeah, I tell you what, I have sat with many an executive and chatted through work-appropriate fidgets. Because this is a problem. It happens a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So what would you say is the biggest challenge that having ADHD has brought to your career?
Different challenges, no single biggest, different challenges at different points in my career. So I would say the hardest part of my career was early in my career when you have no autonomy. Autonomy and or literally being the boss is the best way to manage your ADHD at work, unfortunately. So before you get that, work is really quite hard, especially if you don't have a manager who is understanding of some of the quirks of ADHD. Like even if you don't know you have it, you have all of the quirks of ADHD. So, and again, going back to my 20s, being such a rough decade, hormones raging and whatever, I would say that's the only time in my life that I really experienced that rejection sensitive dysphoria that comes with ADHD, right? So just be super mad at work, doing things where you have no outlet for that. Like that was hard. So that was challenging. And then probably when I started managing people, then in the next decade, as I moved up the ranks at work, that was another challenge with ADHD because the way I like to be managed is to be left alone, but other people want a lot more contact and coaching. And so kind of finding that balance between what makes me happy versus what is best for my employees.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And do you have any advice for anybody who is moving into a kind of managerial role with ADHD?
Yeah, so I haven't done it at this company yet, and I should. So I've got to eat my own dog food. But previous companies, what I do is I have the book of me that I make and hand out, and I hand out a blank one to my employees and say, give me the book of you. How do you like to be worked with? And then I love that. Kind of looks at everybody's couple of pages, of what we like, compares notes, and we kind of come to a consensus for what will work best across the team.
That's great. That's really great. I really love that. And what, on the other side, do you think is a big strength that ADHD has brought to your career?
I would say hands down the multi-focus, multitasking, and the speed that we can get things done has really helped my career. That's been something that I can leverage across every time period in my career. It's helping in my PhD. Like it's, I don't know if I'd be able to do a PhD if I didn't read fast and do things quickly and like leap from one path to the other. So,
yeah, I understand that when I was doing my PhD and running this business, I was doing it on like 1 or 2 days a week. It's just because once you get into focus, and I think this is potentially what you're talking about here is like yes, we can take a while to get into focus and we need those additional days. But once we are focused, once we are going, we can go pretty fast.
Exactly. And I find like even on days when I'm not as focused, and this is more applicable to work than the PhD, but I set up my work day in I use Firefox, and I use a plugin for Firefox, an extension called Containers, Firefox Containers. So I can isolate work, school, home, or different applications, different Gmail instances, et cetera, et cetera. So I will have probably 50 tabs open during the day, and those are my working tabs. And so I accommodate my ADHD by moving across them on the days
Interesting.
that I'm not focused, so that even if I'm not focused, I'm always doing something I need to do for work.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're kind of like letting your brain have some freedom, but not too much freedom.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. And you mentioned, and I was really curious, you said high stakes environments. You said you were experienced in high stakes environment. What is the highest stakes environment that you've ever been in?
Probably I spent a couple years working for McKinsey, and that was very high stakes because my job was to do their digital marketing for the firm side. So they break up their consultancy and firm and partner.
Can you explain what McKinsey is? Sorry, I'm from New Zealand.
McKinsey is one of the original management consulting companies. They've been around for, I think, over 100 years now.
Wow.
They're massive. At the time that I worked there, they had 110 offices around the world, 1,600 partners, and 20,000 employees. They're very large.
That does sound high stakes.
Yeah. One of the things they're known for is they have more CEOs in high power positions and government leaders that graduated from McKinsey partnership than most of the other consulting firms. So they high leverage, high stakes, everything feels like a big consequence. So my ADHD loved it. I mean, that was a really good job for me, but very high stakes, not a lot of room for mistakes or errors. And not everybody in the company on the firm side was willing to move quickly, because there was, when you have stakes that are that high, there's also a little bit of an element of fear for people, right? So they want to get it right.
For sure.
They want to, so that was challenging.
Yeah. What did you do to support yourself in that space?
That was really interesting, because that job was actually one of my few non-remote jobs. I have managed to keep myself remote even before it was a thing. And so that one, I was in New York, in Midtown. And so it was very easy to get out of the office and find some excitement or something to do for just a few minutes and come back. That was very much a function of being in a big city. So I wouldn't have been able to accommodate like that in other places. So.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. What would you say to somebody else who hears, maybe they like, oh, McKinsey and doing this and that. They're like, man, I'd love to do that. What advice would you give for someone else with ADHD who's sort of looking at your career path and thinking, that's a bit of me?
So I would say a couple of different pieces of advice. I would say for getting the job, your network is your strongest asset. Our ability to make friends, to connect with people, to help people, do that. Never stop doing that, because the people in your life help you move forward. You help them move forward, and all boats float to the top. So I would say every excellent job I've had, I have gotten through someone that I've been connected to outside of work. Even the educational opportunities for the same. So develop your network. And then secondary thing, don't worry if you're doing it late.
I love that.
And what I mean by that is I did not go to college until the 2000s, right? I tried it in the 90s. It didn't stick because, I didn't know. And I worried about that for a long time. It didn't slow me down in my career. And then I went back, and I'm doing all the college, because that's how we are as ADHD people. But it didn't hamper my career. So do it late,
Yeah, definitely. And I guess this is a question that I have. We're getting down to sort of detail here, but you mentioned your network, and I think that's such a good point, and I agree wholeheartedly. But I think a lot of people with ADHD are going to be like, you mean networking? I forget who my friends are on a regular basis. So do you have any advice for people who, with working memory struggles, it can be hard?
Yes. So the object permanence struggle is very real. I am the worst with names. So I use a few tools to help me with this. And if you're a friend of mine hearing this, I apologize if this sounds clinical to you. I don't mean it that way.
We all have this experience. A lot of ADHD people are going to be, she's going to say it. She's going to say it.
So a couple of things happen. Like it's good for breakups because I will forget the person exists as soon as they're gone, but not so great for maintaining friendships. I have a calendar called Amy, and it's based out of, I think it's Sweden. It might be Sweden. I'll have to double check that where that's based, but they actually have integrated people management into their calendar with your meeting management. And so when you get a meeting, it pops up every note you've ever taken about the person, your last conversation. Do they have kids? What do they like? How long have you known them? Which sometimes I will forget. And it just helps me nurture the network. Right. To know those things when I talk to people and to remember them. And then I used to be better about this since Facebook has become a thing. I'm a little less great at it, but I like to call and write people on their birthday and like kind of, even if they're a business connection, just keep it warm, always be available for like, if someone's in town and they want to grab coffee, like say yes, embrace the spontaneity of a yes when you can, because that's an ADHD way to keep connected. Right.
Definitely. That's great. That's great. Definitely send me a link to Amy and I will drop it down in this chat, because I think it's so important, because often we hear about networking, and networking is so important. And I say networking as in making friends, like genuine connections with very cool people. But it's so hard to do it when you have ADHD. But a lot of the cool jobs that you can get that involve being your own boss and doing your own thing involve having done networking. So it can be this real bind.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's important, so I don't think of it as networking, right? So I have business contacts that I keep in touch with, and they're in Amy too, and they're going to get a birthday message. But when I say build your network, I mean your medium connections, right? The friendlies that maybe are not work connected, but do something interesting that you like or admire. I'm always looking for reasons to meet the people that I'm inspired by. Right. Yeah. So I'll use an old example. There used to be something called ROFLCon, ROFLCON, in the early days of the internet. That was great for me because I could go meet the big thinkers like Ethan Zuckerman or Dana Boyd that were thinking about the things I was thinking about in person. Right. And, always say yes to those opportunities because it's going to be helpful to you later.
Definitely. Definitely. No, I love that. I think that's such great advice. Okay, well, I just have a few questions that we ask everyone on the podcast. What is one professional achievement that you would say you're the most proud of?
I would probably say getting my most recent company, like helping them get acquired. That was a good one. Yeah, that's probably the one I'm most proud of.
Yeah, no, that's great. And on the other side, is there a professional failure that embarrasses you, and how did you deal with it?
Let's see. We got to dig deep for this one. I am not easily embarrassed just as a person. So, let's see. So I would say the most embarrassing was I started my own agency many, many years ago. And I think it took me way too long. And I didn't know I had ADHD. If I'd known, this would have been a place where it was helpful. It took me way too long to figure out the proper way to pay employees, the proper way to do like taxes, that's something where ADHD hurts other people, right? Because you're disorganized. Yeah. So I would say that's probably in my most negative list.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's always good to be like, it's not just you. Really amazing people struggle with this too.
Oh, always. Yeah.
What would you say is your favorite like dopamine activity? What do you do for a little pick me up or get a bit of energy?
I would say for dopamine activities, it's going to be two things depending on mood and time. The first one is research. I love digging deep on a topic. I am ideally suited for PhD work because I want to know all the things about all the things. And then when I'm not feeling that intellectual, it's TikTok. I'm sad to say I am on TikTok a lot. So.
Well, TikTok did tell you have ADHD, so,
it did. Yeah, it did.
It is being helpful.
It kept serving me people with similar life experiences until I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah, it is crazy. It's almost like it worked as a bit of a diagnostic tool in some ways.
That's what my PhD is about.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh. We'll have to have you back on, by the way, for a research recap. We talk about the latest research, and that would be very interesting. So
yeah, well, I'm going to be doing qualitative interviews in July, I think. So I can't invite people to respond yet because I need to get the IRB to okay my research. But if they find me and keep an eye on my pages, I will be soliciting people with ADHD and TikTok that want to talk about it. So,
Very cool. Very cool. I'm sure there's a lot of people here. So, and then the last question is, if you had an ADHD life motto, what would it be?
Oh, I am very much a seize the day ADHDer, right? Don't let anything stop you. Like, meet the person you want to meet, do the thing you want to do, live a life that's interesting, because that's what we're built to do.
That's really awesome. That's very, very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and your ADHD skills with us today. Where can people find out more about what you're doing, what you're going to be doing? Let us know.
So the two best places to look for the research that I do, one is mindmedia.tech, and one is a podcast I host, Cyberspace, spelled PSYBER.space. So if you liked the PhD stuff, that's where you go for that. And if you want work stuff, they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the LinkedIn URL and my name, Leslie Poston. And I'm always happy to connect with ADHD people that just want someone that gets it and wants to talk.
Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leslie. It's been really, really awesome chatting to you.
I've had a fantastic time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out or connect with us, you can leave us a message at admin@unconventionalorganization.com.
You can also find out more about our ADHD coaching organization, read our free articles, or sign up to our online courses at unconventionalorganization.com. That's organization with a Z or an S. They both will get you there.
If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed here today, or you want to read the transcript, you can find that at our show notes page at unconventionalorganization.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and think someone else might find the strategies and stories helpful, the best thing you can do is share episodes using the share button in the podcast player, or leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or your podcast player of choice, letting them know why you've benefited from this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back in the ADHD lab next week.